Or not. Scott Waller is president and CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council and is kind enough to spend some time with us on this Friday. Scott, great to see you.
Good to see you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to do my best to take a little bit of time. So,
all right.
Now, since you're hosting today, do we get to talk about sports instead of, workforce development and taxes and those kind of things, or do you want to go a different route?
We might get there. I think I'm supposed to toe the line somewhere in between. So, you excited about a football weekend? College football starting?
Sports is an economic driver, right? Particularly college football.
In the state of Mississippi, you better believe it is.
It really is. So.
And if you don't believe it, just ask those businesses in Starkville and Hattiesburg and Oxford, right?
Exactly. So,
how does that factor into what you do when you're working with businesses across the state of Mississippi as an economic driver, the role that college football plays?
Well, actually, it's a big part of just the overall economy. We are on tour right now, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing. The chambers, the folks there, like with the partnership in Starkville and the chamber in Oxford and the area development partnership at Hattiesburg, they focus on the local communities and really understand the benefit of having tens of thousands of people come into the community, rent hotel rooms, eat at the restaurants. I mean, it truly does play a role in helping those communities from, an economic standpoint. It's part of what they plan on. So you think back to last year during COVID, and, it wasn't there. And it makes a big difference for local communities' budget, and it really, they depend on that type of stuff and think through it. But, when dollars are turning over, it's going to help not only the community, but it's all going to help the state. And it really, it's a big part of what we see week in and week out. Luckily in Mississippi, we not only have college football, but in Starkville and Oxford and Hattiesburg, college baseball is a huge driver. And, a lot of people just try to find a hotel room anywhere close to any of those cities on a weekend when they're in town. I mean, it's virtually impossible. And it's something that really helps the local economy. And it's not true tourism, but in a lot of ways it is, because it gets people there, it gets people in the restaurants. You got on a Saturday, if you tailgate, you're probably going to spend 6 to 8 hours. If you just go to the game, you're going to spend 3 to 4. But still, you're doing things in that community, and it makes a difference.
If you had to explain to my 6th grade daughter what the Mississippi Economic Council does, what would you tell her?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Now, what we are is we're a business organization. We represent businesses across the state to really talk about things that will help their business grow. That is the ultimate goal. How do we bring new business to Mississippi? Are the policies in place to allow us to do that? And are the policies in place to allow the businesses that are here to be successful? That is the ultimate goal of what we do at the Chamber.
So you mentioned a second ago this listening tour, the Let Your Voice Be Heard events for Mississippi. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, every year for the past 15 plus years, we have done what we call our tour, our road show. We've been very fortunate. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Mississippi has sponsored this to allow us to be able to go out across the state in these communities. And in the past, what we've done is it's been more of we do a program, we get feedback usually through, we have electronic voting devices where we'll ask a question, you get the immediate results. We also have a survey that they can do while they're there that has some additional questions to it. And that information has been very helpful to us in terms of helping us know that the policies that we're working on or where we need to be headed and what we need to be doing with them. But, with COVID, we have to think differently about a lot of things. And when we were thinking about this back first of the year, we just didn't feel comfortable that we would be in a position to do a meeting where you had 100 to 150 people in a room like we've done in the past.
Sure.
And we got to thinking about what can we do that would be impactful and meaningful. And again, working with Blue Cross and others, we felt like we found a solution that we would do these small group sessions. And they're small group sessions, But what it does is it gives us a lot of them. We do 3 a day when we're out across the state, and they allow people a chance to really get into the details. With the three primary issues we're looking at are education and workforce development, because they're tied. No matter whether it's pre-K or adult learning, it's all tied together in terms of the education you're receiving is going to lead to your ability to be able to be in the workforce. Secondly, we're looking at the business climate. What are we doing in the state that's going to allow us to be successful and do the things that we need to do? As I said earlier when I described what we do as an organization, make sure we have the right policies in place to help our businesses grow and be successful. And then third is we are addressing the issue of what's commonly referred to as brain drain. Brain drain simply defines as you're going to leave one area of somewhere and go to another area because you feel like there are better opportunities. And that's where we spend most of the discussion during these meetings. Now, they're all intertwined. There are other factors that come in. But ultimately, it's been really great to get into some of the details and get the feedback, because this year, instead of me going out and talking about the things we're working on, I'll introduce the program. I've got a moderator that runs the program. I sit down and I listen. And the feedback I'm getting has just been absolutely tremendous. We're learning things that maybe will help us develop better policy. We're learning where there are issues, particularly in the career technical area at the high school level, that maybe we can say, okay, we've identified these are some problems that we need to look at. We've identified places that are doing it really well. What is it that they're doing that we might can carry into a much broader approach to do things? So, it's just really been good. Our intent is to take all of this information and put together a report that looks at the commonalities from across the state and look at kind of what are some things that all areas are facing, and then do a little bit more of a regional approach in certain places to say, okay, here's the differences, say in the Delta versus the coast.
What are the differences between the Pine Belt region, the Mississippi Gulf Coast, Northwest Mississippi, specifically DeSoto County, the Delta, and then, kind of the central part of the state? What are the biggest differences you see?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, and we know, some of these things we know, unfortunately, education is a big component in all of this. And in certain places in the state, I think we have some tremendously good educational systems in the K-12 level. And you see some things that they're doing that is just tremendous in terms of preparing our students to either be successful in college or be successful in the workforce. Others, there's some issues. So we need to say, how do we address those issues? So, because there are a lot of things that really are different. And on the coast, for example, when we talked to the groups, they talked about the things that were good in the schools. In the Delta, not quite as much optimism about what was happening at the K-12 level. And so those are some things that I think we'll be able to take and look at. But, I'll use one example that came up. In the Delta, they were talking about the need for transportation to get people to and from work, because a gentleman told the story that he worked with a community college up there, and he said, I had a program put in place that was just tremendous. He says, I had the training paid for, I had the equipment paid for, I had the clothes they needed to wear paid for. I had a way for them to get there. We go through this program. I have a student who's very successful. He goes out, he interviews, he gets a job. And the minute he gets the job, he's got this look on his face of fear, because he says he doesn't know how he's going to get there every day. You go to the coast, you hear the same story in the service industry. So in terms of providing ways, whether it be public transportation or systems that get people to and from places to help them be able to get to work, to be successful, those are things you don't really think about until you get into these discussions and realize, hey, the Delta's got the same problem that the coast does on this issue. What are some things that we can do to look at? So, that's just one example of some of the things we're learning that's really been kind of eye-opening to a certain extent. And really, I feel like that this is going to help us as we move forward in developing our recommendations and policies.
Visiting with Scott Waller. He's the president and CEO at the Mississippi Economic Council. You got time to hang with me for one more segment?
Sure. Happy to.
We're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to ask him when we come back about what is going to be a difficult debate in the Mississippi legislature starting in January, I think, when they take up the conversation about state income tax. What effect does that have?
Now, y'all promised I wouldn't have to talk.
Community?
Y'all promised I wouldn't have to talk about that. No, I'm just kidding.
And we will do that when we come back and continue with Scott Waller. It's the JT Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Richard Cross in Labor Day weekend. Continuing our conversation with Scott Waller, who is president and CEO of MEC, the Mississippi Economic Council. They are in the middle of a listening tour. The Let Your Voice Be Heard tour across Mississippi. We were talking about some of the feedback that he's getting from different regions in the state of Mississippi. And explained to us a second ago, in layman's terms, I couched it as how he would explain it to my 6-year-old daughter, but what I really needed was it to be explained to me on that level. Threw her under the bus, but said, it's about doing what's needed for businesses in Mississippi, the business community in the state of Mississippi. So, Scott, I'm not going to jump right into the state income tax thing, but I do think this will be kind of a bridge into that conversation. When I think about where we as a state sit geographically and kind of look at the surrounding states, we've got so very many similarities, and yet we've also got differences. Tennessee is a state that in a lot of areas is bustling. I mean, Nashville's insane with the growth that it has. Birmingham's going crazy. Huntsville's going crazy. Little Rock and Northwest Arkansas seem to be kind of going crazy. Louisiana's a little bit different. Where do we fit in kind of within our geographic region, and how do we capture some of the growth that is happening in some of those other places to bring it to Mississippi? Can we?
I'm a firm believer that we can. And I think that there's some things that we have to just recognize. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to, in my opinion, you can't compare Mississippi to Tennessee, or you can't compare them to Texas, because we don't have that major metropolitan area that is a Nashville or an Austin or Dallas or whatever the case may be. But, we can compare ourselves to other parts of Tennessee that are more rural and smaller communities. I think what we have to realize is that, the cost of living in Mississippi, the quality of life, the outdoors opportunities, the things that we can do here are an advantage that we need to be selling that we aren't selling as well as we are. I mean, okay. I use this one of the tour stops we were on. We were talking about this issue of how do we keep more of our best and our brightest. And somebody made the statement, says, they'll leave and then they tend to come back around 30 to 35 years old. And the terminology used it's the marriages and the mortgages that get them back. It's they want to come back to where it's somewhere safe, where there's a good school system, where they feel comfortable with their kids being where maybe they were. They also want to have the affordability of buying a house because, I know for a fact with the son in Washington D.C. right now, it's not really cheap to live in some of these cities. I mean, it's an expensive place to be. Mississippi has a lot of advantages. So our goal is we need to play that. We need to really emphasize that in a way that will get people to understand there's a lot of things that you can do that will create opportunities for you in Mississippi, and also your dollar goes a whole lot further in the state of Mississippi than it does a lot of other places. And I think that's something that we haven't really built on as much as I feel like we can. But I think that's really where it all lies, is that, how do we sell what Mississippi has to offer, what we do? And I think, we're making progress. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. I've been on the air with, the changing of the flag was a step, but it doesn't cure everything, but it's definitely a step to say, look, we can do some things differently in Mississippi, but we also need to then capitalize on taking advantage of what our state has to offer that you may not find in some of these larger metropolitan places where kids are going right now.
Yeah, and I certainly think our greatest asset is our people. I certainly would think that you would believe in that
without
as well.
Question.
I am curious, what's the balance when you're working perhaps in conjunction with MDA, and their mission I know may be a little bit different than yours, but what's the balance when you're talking about trying to bring new business to Mississippi between manufacturing jobs, companies that are going to come in and they're going to be able to employ 100 or 300 or 1,200 versus, and I don't know if I'm going to use the right phrase here, but white-collar jobs or professional jobs that are going to employ recent graduates so that maybe they don't move to Nashville or Little Rock or Austin.
And I think that's where we got to focus our attention. I think for so long we've always focused on that big win, that big facility that's going to bring in 2,000 jobs or 1,000 jobs, or in the case of a Nissan, 6,000 jobs.
Yeah,
and that's where you focus your attention. But in reality,
and those things are fantastic.
Oh, we need them, and they're a big driver. They help the economy. But one of the meetings we were in just this week talked about how do we make Mississippi the state of entrepreneur. I can't even say the word now, but for entrepreneurs to come in and really have a place where they can be successful, because there's so many opportunities. And after one thing that we came out of COVID with, you can work just about anywhere, as long as you've got high-speed internet and you can do that. And we're making great strides in that. I mean, the legislature had a tremendous step forward in opening up the door for rural areas across the state to get it in non-traditional ways through the cooperative electrics. We've seen a lot of money be put into it. There's still some more money that's probably coming in that front that will help offset that cost, because it's expensive, and when you're doing it in a city, you've got a big base of people to pull from. When you're doing the rural areas, you may not have quite as many. So there's some things that have to be done that helps us get there. But once we do that, that creates the opportunity to be anywhere, to be creative, to be inventive, to create that place that the entrepreneur can come and thrive and be successful. And I think we're also starting to see a difference now in the type of businesses that are being recruited to the state, that they're not just strictly manufacturing. We're looking at, maybe not as many jobs, but how valuable is a company that brings in 30 jobs that pay $75,000 to $80,000 versus, to me, it's equally as valuable as a company that's going to bring in a couple of hundred jobs in the manufacturing sector. So, we've got to balance it. Both are important. Yeah. But I think now more than ever, we're starting to see that go beyond just the basic manufacturing. And I think that's one of the things that I think will help us, tremendously, if we can take advantage of the fact that we're really starting to see the opportunity to bring people here that can work just about anywhere. Go have as I said, we talked earlier about the quality of life and how we can take advantage of that. I think that's something we need to focus our attention on.
All right, so as someone who represents the business community in Mississippi and is all about growing business, when you look at this debate about the state income tax and perhaps the elimination of that or the swapping of a tax to a different area, look, I'm not Gerard. I don't understand the tax code the way he does, but I do understand that there are surrounding states, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, that do not have state income taxes, and I see economies in those places that are thriving. What's your stance? What's MEC's stance on this?
Well, we think there needs to be a little more effort put into taking a look at these states that we're talking about trying to emulate, because what we're learning is they do it, but there's taxes in other places. Sure. And that's what we're seeing. I was on a call yesterday with a national group out of Washington called the Council of State Taxation, and they were talking about Texas. They're very high property taxes there. It's not just the tax issue; it is also the other amenities. It's the fact that we live. There was a time, Richard, when I came out of college, my first job was in Greenville, Mississippi, as a sports writer. I went to the job. You didn't pick where you wanted to live. You found the job and you went there. Now a lot of people are picking, I want to go live here and I will go figure out what I'm going to do once I get there. Huh. So it's a different mindset to a certain extent. So we've got to start finding a way to sell that. But again, as far as the income tax goes, I think elimination of the personal income tax is a very laudable goal. I really do. However, the way it's structured right now with increasing the sales tax, there's some issues there on several fronts, because it's a pass-through for retailers, but it's not a pass-through for a lot of other businesses who will have to raise their cost of doing business if that happens. So I think what we're looking at is let's spend a little more time to say, okay, what are some things within our system that are currently there that can be adjusted that will allow us to do this with maybe not having to raise that that sales tax either at all or as much, or and what are some things that we can do? Is it that we may not be able to do the whole thing, but can we do something? So I think we've been working, trying to work with the legislature on that. When this first came out, we had some serious concerns over the business inputs that were being increased in taxes, because that's the cost of doing business. And if other states aren't doing that, and Mississippi is one of only 2 states in the South that even has that tax, and they were wanting to raise it. Now, to their credit, they realized that they've since removed the amended version, which we don't know what the version is going to look like that comes out in January, but the amended version had moved that. That's a big step forward. I think there's some other things that we can look at that can do that. But until we really take time to study it and know the differences, just to say Tennessee doesn't have this, so we need to do it, is one thing. But to say Tennessee doesn't have this because they also have X, Y, and Z, then maybe we need to figure out, is X, Y, and Z best for us, or do we need to go a different direction? So that's
and when that money makes up roughly a third of your overall budget, it's got to come from somewhere.
It's got to come from somewhere. So
I don't think we want to cut a third across the board either.
No, we don't, and I think that's the thing. It's just we want to work with legislative leaders, and we hope to do that, sure. But we just see there's some issues right now that we haven't really been able to work through to get the answers we need.
Scott, thanks so much for your time. Really enjoyed the visit. Hope you have a great Labor Day weekend, and look forward to catching up with you down the line.
You bet. You as well.
Scott Waller, President and CEO, Mississippi Economic Council. We'll wrap up the 11 o'clock